Alright, so here we have an opening hand without an actual red source, but we do have Cavern. So normally you want to Cavern on human, and that could help us cast our Norin. So yeah, I guess we want to keep this. Have a Soul Warden and some decent stuff. Alright, so Mountain Signal Pest, that's definitely an interesting opener. Some affinity decks play a single mountain, but we don't necessarily put our opponent on affinity just because we're seeing Ornithopters and Signal Pests. There are definitely some other weird artifact decks that our opponent could potentially be playing. Alright, so gonna lead here on the Cavern, naming human. And I think we want to get this Soul Warden into play right now so that if our opponent does dump more creatures onto the board, we can protect against that a little bit by preserving our life total with this Soul Warden in play. And look towards getting Norin the Wary into play alongside Perforos and trying to win that way, potentially. So we'll see how our opponent reacts to this Soul Warden. Here's a Legion Loyalist. Okay, so immediately we see that our opponent is playing not a typical artifact deck at all. So here's an attack with everything, it looks like. So the Legion Loyalist bonus is in play. So of course we are not going to block. That's going to mean taking 4 damage here. So we're able to cast this Norin the Wary. And then we can play the Windswept Teeth. That can search for a Sacred Foundry if we want to. But I like attacking now with the Soul Warden. That's going to trigger the Norin the Wary. And so now we're going to get that extra Soul Warden trigger, which is kind of nice. And we have access to Lightning Bolt if we want it. We can bolt away the Signal Pest potentially here. Although here's a Kuldotha Rebirth. Okay. So that's going to make 3 1/1s. But we are going to get the triggers off our Soul Warden, which is pretty nice. And we'll see what the follow-up here is. Okay, it's a Goblin Bushwhacker. So this is going to be a pretty big turn for our opponent. All of these goblins are going to have haste. So I think we want to go ahead and Lightning Bolt something. So that is going to mean we are going to have to shock ourselves off the Sacred Foundry. And we probably want to bolt down the Signal Pest because it's going to give a bonus to all of our opponent's other creatures. So let's go ahead and do that. But our opponent's draw is still pretty explosive. So we're going to take a good chunk of damage here, unfortunately. So that's going to mean we're all the way down to 9 and back up to 10 after the Norin the Wary comes back. Not looking too good for us, though. We don't have a ton we can do here. So we don't really want to be blocking with our Soul Warden, but we don't really have any good plays here, unfortunately. Our opponent is out of cards. That's kind of the only good thing about this spot. So Yeah, I mean we can attack with both of our creatures. It's not really gonna do us a ton, but um, we're just gonna have to hope to draw something quickly. Because we're basically taking 6 damage coming across here. From the Legion Loyalist, the Bushwhacker, and the 3 Goblin tokens. So that's a lot of damage. That's gonna put us all the way down to 5 here. And of course, Norin the Wary, it is not an effective blocker or attacker. It's more just a combo card. It doesn't really do any attacking or blocking. And here's a Signal Pest, which is more bad news. So let's see if we can draw something here. Unfortunately, it's our second copy of Perforos, which just doesn't do anything for us. So we're just going to go to game 2. Not the best draw for our side, and our opponent had a pretty impressive draw on the other side of the table. Would have been really nice to have something like a Genesis Chamber that game. Would have been really hard for our opponent to get through that card. So here, I think we want to look at the Electricaries. We saw a lot of 1 toughness creatures. So yeah, we can go ahead and look to board in these. So besides the Electricaries, we can board in the Wear Tears as a way to destroy an artifact, but I don't even know that that's what we necessarily want to be doing. I think we got a little bit unlucky in that last game. Our draw was not at all what we wanted. Return to the Ranks ended up not being that impressive. I think we can board out our 1 Legion Loyalist and we can probably board out a Return to the Ranks as well. The Wear Tears, they could kill a Signal Pest or an Ornithopter, but we didn't really see those big creatures. Let's see. Stony Silence. We didn't actually see that many cards Stony Silence hits out of our opponent's deck. Core Firewalker. Core Firewalker I think we do want. Our opponent does have some red cards, which we saw. So I think we can take out our Return to the Ranks. We didn't see that much removal. So let's try this configuration. And we are on the play this game. So I do think this hand is pretty decent. We're definitely significantly happier about this hand than our last one. And once again, just going to start with a Cavern on Human. So, last game, had we had Electricary, it would have just been insane for us. The Kuldotha Rebirth, the Signal Pest, the Reckless Bushwhacker, even the Legion Loyalist, we could overload Electricary, and we would have completely wrecked our opponent. Now, of course, that didn't happen. We didn't have that card in our deck, but now we do. So, we can think about scenarios which involve Electricary. And now that we're able to play Soul Warden on turn 1, we're getting that immediate bonus from a card like Ornithopter, which is also pretty good. And we can play a Johnny Primate on our next turn. And Primate can get big really fast, but it looks like our opponent's going immediately for an Infernal Purge. So we'll see what's going on here. Our opponent does definitely have access to a lot of mana here. We'll see if there's anything that our opponent can do with the mana. something like... Okay, so it's actually going to be a Goblin Bushwhacker. So our opponent's going to be able to attack us here for a good chunk of damage. But we do have this Electrickery. So I think we just want to take the damage, and then we can Electrickery away a lot of our opponent's creatures here. So just gonna go ahead and attack with the Soul Warden, and then pass the turn here. So now I think we want to shock ourselves. So we're going to get a Sacred Foundry here with the Aramesa. And cast this Electrickery with Overload. I guess we could have played our actual Sacred Foundry rather than fetching, but oh well. It's not going to make too much of a difference, I don't think. And here's the Soul Warden. So now we're going to be able to essentially start going off. I actually like leading with the Genesis Chamber just to try to gain as much life as we can. So we can shock ourselves here, but then we're going to go up in life, and then we're also going to get the token off the Genesis Chamber, which is going to trigger both of our Soul Warden and our Soul's Ascendant. Basically the same card. So, yeah, we're looking in great shape here. The Ajani Primates, along with the 1/1s that we're going to be generating off the Genesis Chamber, should be plenty. Now we drew a Norin, so we can go ahead and cast that. And this is basically what this deck is meant to do, and our opponent is going to correctly concede in that spot. We just had way too much of an advantage for our opponent to have pretty much any chance of coming back there. So looks like there is going to be a game 3. So Thalia is a place we can go here. Legion Loyalists is an option. I actually don't even think we need the Perforos. Just seeing how our opponents operate and how fast our opponent is coming out of the gate, we just want to have early stuff. Even a Legion Loyalist could just being able to block. Oh, and we probably want Kataki, even though Kataki it's weird, right? Like, it's good, but it also is going to mess with our Genesis Chamber potentially. I think we do want it in our deck. Kind of overlooked that card before. So, yep, gonna put it in and try this out for the last game. So our opponent's aiming to just really go hard with these Bushwhacker effects and Kuldotha Rebirth. And sometimes that is going to work. Gonna keep this hand, although we really wish we had double white to be able to cast the Aura Champion. We also don't have the Electrickery we would like, so we're going to have to play a little bit more of a fair game, essentially. Have the option of Soul Warden here or Champion of the Parish. And I think the decision is pretty close. But I'm going to play the Soul Warden. Our opponent definitely could have removal that we haven't seen, like a Lightning Bolt type effect, but we've seen our opponent play so many creatures that being able to gain life when our opponent plays a creature is really pretty important. And we can set up with Genesis Chamber, Primate. We can basically set up with all of this stuff pretty quickly, and if we're able to be at a reasonable life total when we get this Genesis Chamber going, we will be in quite a good spot. But you never know. Like, our opponent going Mountain Pass is pretty scary, so I'm expecting that our opponent is deliberating how to go about deploying a bunch of threats here. So it looks like the choice is to start off with an Ornithopter. So that's going to allow us to get the Soul Warden trigger. Now our opponent could continue on with something like a Reckless Bushwhacker. Kuldotha Rebirth, it looks like it's going to be the play instead. But now we're really happy to have this Soul Warden in play, of course, because we're able to gain 4 life off of this exchange. And let's see if there's another play that our opponent has as a follow-up. It looks like there is going to be another play, so we'll see what that is going to be. But this is a weird deck where our opponent does have artifacts in their deck, but they're more as fuel for the Kuldotha Rebirth, and it's not necessarily a full-fledged artifact deck. So I like just playing the Genesis Chamber here because we know how many creatures our opponent has and the Bushwhackers and stuff like that, and we really want to be able to generate some advantage off of that. So with the Genesis Chamber, it triggers when our opponent is casting creatures as well, and that's why the card is so powerful in these types of matchups. Is that if our opponent goes for something like a Reckless Bushwhacker into multiple creatures. Now, the one thing that it doesn't do is if our opponent Kuldotha Rebirths, it is a non-token creature, so we're not going to be able to get any value off of our Genesis Chamber there, but we see here that we're going to get value off of our Genesis Chamber for this Goblin Bushwhacker. So we're not only going to gain the life off of the Soul Warden, but our opponent is going to get the mirror token. So what we're doing here is we're able to gain the value basically off the Soul Warden, but our opponent at the same time is going to get a mirror token for their troubles. So it's basically a double-edged sword in this type of situation. So the thing about Genesis Chamber is I may have overlooked it a little bit in terms of the fact that this mirror token is also a bit of a problem. So this may not have been the correct line, but we're just going to take it and fall to 14. So it's nice that we're able to gain the life off the mirror token, but now our opponent has a mirror token. So the question is, do we want to play the Genesis Chamber game, essentially, and play the other one? And I don't think we necessarily need to here. So instead, I like getting the Ajani's Primate into play. And now what we're going to be able to do is really get value off of this Genesis Chamber. So we're going to get a mirror token, and that's going to trigger our Primate. So the Primate is going to get really big. So we're happy about that. And we can also play the Champion of the Parish. So even though our opponent had a pretty big turn there, we are still in reasonable shape. So this Ajani's Primate went from being a 2/2 all the way to a 6/6. Had we had 3 white mana, potentially could have gone Aria Champion into champion of the Paris, but we can always follow up with the champion on our next turn. So we have more creatures in our deck than our opponent, so the Genesis Chambers are going to be better most of the time, and we're seeing that here. I think we can go ahead and also attack for 1 with our Soul Warden. And shift the turn. So we see just how much of an effect a card like Genesis Chamber has. It really warps the game in a big way. We're able to get value out of it. Our opponent is getting some value out of it by having tokens of their own. But I think overall, it's better for us. It's one of those weird cards. Really weird card. And it's a card that not too many decks play, so haven't seen the card actually be in use in quite a while here. But we're seeing a ton of tokens hit the battlefield. And so we do have to worry about the Bushwhacker type cards for sure. If our opponent goes something like a Bushwhacker, here it is going to represent a lot of damage. The nice thing, though, is that we're at a high life total, and now we have this huge Ajani's Primate to pressure our opponent with, if we want to do that. But our opponent does still have 3 cards in hand, so here's the Inferno Plunge. This could be the Bushwhacker. We'll see if that's the case. It's actually going to be Haze of Rage. Okay, interesting. So that's going to pump up our opponent's whole squad, and that's pretty insane. So it looks like our opponent still is only able to attack us with 5 creatures, and we have 4 blockers, so it's definitely not the end of the world. So we can use our mirror tokens here to block our opponent's creatures, which are 5/1s, and I think we're okay with actually just trading away our champion of the parish. And it looks like that's going to do it. Our opponent just isn't going to have enough to stop our Johnny's Primate, and we have plenty of gas later in the game, so our opponent's just going to concede, and it looks like after that Haze of Rage, there wasn't enough gas left in our opponent's tank to beat our draw.